Hello, welcome to the session on Python functions. So today we are going to learn all about what functions are, how to use them and why to use them. So functions in Python, a function is a group of related statements that can perform a specific task. They help to break our program into smaller and manageable chunks, make it more modular, and therefore it becomes more organized. Also, functions make the code reusable, which is really important. For example, if you have a particular function that you want to implement and you make it perfect, then every time you run that function, you are assured that there will be no bugs. If you're having to type the code every time again, bugs can tend to creep in. So the idea is to make a function perfect without any bugs, then pack it away and reuse it whenever you want to have that same functionality. So let's look at the syntax of function. This is how a Python function is syntaxed. We have a keyword called def, which is for defining, def. Then we give a space and then we give the function name. A function name is named in the same way as a variable or any other named thing in a Python is done. So the convention is to have lowercase and separated, the individual components are separated by an underscore, something called the lower camel case. Function names should be representative of the task that they are doing, and for that reason also it is important that functions perform only one task. If you want to have two tasks, better to have two functions. Following the function name, we have what are called the parameters. Parameters are variables that the function will take in from the outside world, do its magic, and then the function may probably return something back. Now parameters can be anything. You could pass a number, you could pass a string. The word parameters is as a part of the function definition or function signature. But when you actually pass a value to the function, then it is called an argument. So there's a fine difference between parameter and argument. Parameters are generic, arguments are the specific values that have been passed to the function. After the function name and the parameters, we have to specify a colon that indicates this part is over, and then the next lines will be indented. The indentation tells Python that this, as far as it is indented, this is part of the same function. We next come to something very important called a docstring. A docstring is documentation for the function. Now this is different from commenting. A docstring is available to any user of the function just by simply calling a specific double under function. We'll come to that later. But whatever you type in here in this docstring is going to be available to the user. So it's a tradition to put in a brief description of the function's activities in this place. So for example, if we have a function that prints hello world, it could be a simple function, then we might write this function prints hello world. It's enclosed in triple quotes and you can break it across lines as well. And docstring can be fairly elaborate also. You can have a whole paragraph describing what the function does. So after docstring, we get the code statements that actually make up the body of the function. This could be a single statement, it could be multiple statements. Now, so this is how a function is structured in general. Now, there are some other points that we have mentioned here. You feel free to pause the video and take a look. And then when you're ready, you can move on. Right. So now let's get right into it and take a look at how a function actually works. Here we are defining a function. So def is the keyword we are using. The function we are defining is going to be called greet. And it's going to take a name as a parameter, right? This function greets to the person passed in as a parameter. This is the docstring that we are using. So we are telling the world that this is what our function is going to do. And once we get into the body of the function, this function is going to print something. It's going to say print hello. Then it's going to print the name, which is going to be taken from this place here. So whatever argument we have passed to the function is going to come over here. And then we're going to say good morning. Now, once we define the function, we must run the cell. So let's run it now. And then the function has been defined for this notebook. The next thing, you will notice that nothing has happened. It's not printed anything. And that's because we have not called the function yet. When we want to use the functionality that we have implemented here, we must call the function. So how do you call a function in Python? Well, like you call anything else, you call it by name. So let's say the name of the function is greet. So we're calling this function by saying greet, and then within the parenthesis, this is the argument. Paul is the argument we're going to give it. So we're saying I want to call the function greet, and I want to pass Paul to it. Let's run it and see what happens. So it says, hello Paul, good morning. So you'll notice that Paul has come over here because this was the argument that was passed. We can change it to any other argument. Let's say we say Pat, run it again. It says, hello Pat, good morning. So this shows you how a function can be used multiple times. We can use the same function n number of times, not a problem. Hello Patty also. So we're creating two persons. Right. Now let's look at docstring in a little more detail. We wrote the docstring when we described the function, when we defined it. But what if we want to see what a function's docstring is? So for that we can use greet dot double underscore dot doc double underscore. Now the two double underscores on either side are something unique to Python, and they are called dunder variables because they are surrounded by double underscores. But for now, just remember that if you pass two underscores, doc two underscores, and use the greet function, we are invoking the greet function here, and we print it out. It's going to tell us what the docstring of that function is. Let's run it and see. So this is the string that we had initially defined. This function greets to the person passed in as a parameter. So now by using the docstring, we know exactly what our function is doing. Now when we ran the function, it printed it out. But suppose we are going to use a function to run a calculation. Let's say I want the square of a number I pass to a function. So I pass it 2 and I wanted to return 4. So this functionality is embodied in the return statement. Let's look at what the return statement does. The return statement is going to return something from the function. And remember that whenever in a function's code loop or a code statements, the function comes across return as it is executing, at that point of time, the function will return whatever is in that line and it will exit. So the rest of the function, if you have put anything below it, is not going to be executed. The first time an executing function hits return, it returns something and gets out of the function. So let's look at the syntax of return. So we just simply type return, and whatever has to be returned, it could be a list, it could be a tuple, it could be a dictionary, it could be a simple number as well. So whatever has to be returned is returned here. Now in Python you can return multiple things. In other languages you can return only a single thing from a function, but in Python you can return multiple things which can be separated by a comma, or you could just return a list also. A list could be an elaborate thing. Or if you are doing pandas and you want to return a data frame, that works too. So return can return any kind of data back to the user. Where it goes is, wherever the function was called from. So let's see. We're going to print greet May, and it's printed the same function that we're using, but the return type is none. See, it's not returned anything, so that's why it's saying none here. Had we returned something, we would have gotten that value. Let's take a look at how return works. Now we're defining a new function here called absolute value. We're going to pass a parameter, a variable num to it, and the function is going to return the absolute value of the entered number. Now we have an absolute function in parameter Now we have an absolute value function in Python itself, the ABS function, which is a predefined function. But this is just to show you how the function return works. So we are defining our own function here. If the number that we have passed, it is more than or equal to 0, that is, if it's a positive number, then we return the number as such. So if you're passing +2 or +3 or +4, it's going to return it as such, no changes. And if it does that, then the else is never executed, because once it hits return, that's it. Now the else statement for this conditional, we know that the number is not a positive number if we have managed to reach the else statement. That means the number is less than 0. So it could be -1, it could be -10, whatever. So we return the negative of that number. So if we've got -10, we're going to take minus of -10, which is +10. So we return the negative of that number. So this is how we are implementing the absolute function. Now let's try and run it and see what happens. If we are going to invoke absolute value, we're going to call it using the argument 2. It's going to go through this part of the loop and return 2 to us. For -4 rather, it's going to go through this part of the conditional inside the function and return 4 back to us. So now we're going to print the return and see what happens. We got 2 and 4. Now we could also assign it. these return values can be assigned very easily. So let's say a equals, and let's use the same thing here. So a is equal to absolute value minus 4, and we run it. Now nothing's happened because we haven't printed it yet. So if we just print out a, and let's take a different value just to be clear, minus 5, let's say. So you can see that it's printed an output as 5. Now this 5 has been stored in a, and therefore you can use it in any of your other programming tasks. Now a word about the scope and the life of variables. Functions have variables within them. So these variables will only work to the time that the function is being executed. Once you exit the function, then those variables which have been defined within the function are lost. Let's take a look at how exactly this works. So we have defined a new function called myfunc, and this function doesn't take any argument at all. It's a no argument function, and the only thing it does is it assigns a value of 10 to x, and then it's going to print the value inside the function is x. So this is our code within the function. X gets a value 10, and then it prints that x. Now, having defined the function, let's come outside. We have come outside because you can see there is no indent. We say x is equal to 20. We call my function, which is going to do this thing, and then we print value outside the function of x. Let's run the code and see what's happening. So let's go over it step by step. We said x is equal to 20, so Python knows that x has got a value of 20. We go into myfunc, we say x is 20, and we print x, which is 20. So this is what the function has done. It's printed value inside the function is 10. Now this x is in a separate namespace from this x. So once this function is over, there is no meaning for this x. The older x that we had defined outside still lives in Python memory. So when we print this statement, the x that we are going to call or print is going to be this one, which is exactly what has happened. So it's a good thing because it keeps the namespace separate and doesn't let the function's internals interfere with anything on the outside, which is really important because you don't want a function to inadvertently change a variable that was being used by somebody else on the outside. However, you can still access a function that has been defined outside a function. You can still access a variable that has been defined outside the function, and for that you will need to assign the variable as a global variable. So that's for a different lesson, but just remember this. A variable that has been declared to be global can be accessed within the function. So that's all for now for defining functions and using them. I hope you enjoyed the lesson, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.